I should have closed the door the moment I saw him standing there under the porch light, with that look in his eyes. But I didn't. I stepped aside, and just like that, the past came flooding in, wrapped in silence, and something far more dangerous. You think betrayal ends when someone dies. Let me tell you a story, because sometimes what's left behind isn't grief. It's a truth so heavy, it refuses to stay buried. Hit like, subscribe, and stay with me, because this isn't just a story about love and loss. It's about the moment when silence becomes a confession and desire a warning. The heat in Charleston clings to you like guilt. Even now, as I sit alone in this creaking old house, with the sun pouring through lace curtains and dust dancing in its path, I can still feel it, that thick, unrelenting southern heat. It settles into your bones and refuses to leave, just like memories. This house has seen too much. The walls know things I never said aloud, like how often I thought about Desmond and hated myself for it. Back in the summer of '88, everything looked normal. From the outside, I was still Mrs. Clara Whitmore, then the devoted wife, the gracious hostess, the woman who always wore pearls to Sunday service. Michael, my husband, was the kind of man people admired. Smart, well-spoken, ambitious, a partner at a respected law firm, and a man who loved predictability. Desmond was his opposite in almost every way. He was also Michael's best friend. He didn't wear his suits like armor. He wore them like skin, comfortable, effortless. He had a voice like slow bourbon and eyes that stayed on you a second too long. He'd come by on warm nights, bringing documents or bourbon, sometimes. Both Michael would light a cigar. I'd bring out sweet tea, and we'd sit, the three of us, on the wraparound porch, with the cicadas humming like they were trying to drown out something unsaid. I used to watch the way Michael laughed around him. It was different, looser. They had a bond I never questioned until I did. It started in the quiet spaces, the way Desmond's hand would brush mine when I handed him a glass, the way his eyes would linger when Michael turned away, the way I felt my breath catch even when nothing had happened. Yet, and that's the problem, isn't it? Sometimes it's not what you do, it's what you almost do. And how often we never spoke about it. I doubt he would have dared. But something passed between us. Something I couldn't name. Something that waited patient as the heat, heavy as the silence. Across the street, Mrs. Della Mayfield watched it all from her porch. She was the kind of neighbor you forget to notice until she becomes impossible to ignore. Always in the same chair, always with her embroidery hoop. Eyes sharp behind those thick glasses, she never missed a thing. At the time, I thought of her as nothing more than a fixture, like a rocking chair that creaked when the wind blew. But later, I would realize she had seen far more than she ever let on. Guilt doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers quietly, constantly, like a leaky faucet you can't fix. And for me, it started every time I caught myself wondering if Desmond would come by that evening. And hoping he would, I hated myself for it. Michael wasn't oblivious. He noticed things, not in the way that makes you feel watched, but in the way that makes you feel known. He'd tilt his head slightly when I spoke about Desmond, like he was listening for something I wasn't saying. He'd sit beside me at dinner, but no longer reach for my hand. And when Desmond did stop by, the air shifted. Michael would lean back in his chair, arms crossed, smiling too tightly. He stopped lighting cigars, stopped pouring drinks. He watched us, not always directly, but enough for me to feel my skin burn with awareness. At night, lying beside him, I could feel the distance. It wasn't physical, it was something colder, quieter, like trust unraveling in the dark. I told myself it was nothing, that Desmond was just Desmond, that Michael was stressed, that I was reading too much into things. But the truth was, I had already begun to dread the knock on the door and crave it in equal measure. One afternoon, I stepped outside to shake out a rug, and Mrs. Mayfield was sitting there again. Same chair, same embroidery hoop. Only this time, she didn't pretend not to see me. She looked straight at me. Needle paused in midair and gave me a small, knowing nod, as if to say, I see you, not in judgment, not in kindness, just truth. That look stayed with me longer than it should have. After that day, I closed the curtains more often, but sometimes I still caught her silhouette behind the screen door across the street. Still silent, unmoving. I told myself it was in my head, that she was just a lonely old woman. But something in her stillness made my stomach tighten. Michael started working later, or at least that's what he said. Some nights, he came home smelling of whiskey. Other nights of fresh air, like he'd been walking for hours alone, trying to think something through. We stopped talking, not in anger. We just faded. I don't know if he was waiting for me to confess, or for himself to decide what to do with the truth he already sensed. But I knew one thing. Every time Desmond's name came up, Michael's silence grew heavier, and I was running out of ways to bury what I felt. It happened on a Wednesday, the kind of day where the heat hangs low and still, where even the cicadas sound lazy. Michael had come home earlier than usual. No warning, no calls, just the turn of a key in the door and the sound of his shoes on the old wooden floor. I was folding laundry in the bedroom. He didn't say anything, just walked into the kitchen like always. I remember hearing the clink of the coffee pot, the creak of the cabinet, and then a sound I'd never heard from him before. A sharp gasp, then silence. When I found him, he was on the kitchen floor, one hand clutching his chest, the other still halfway to the coffee mug. His eyes wide open, unmoving. I dropped to my knees so fast I scraped them on the tiles. I called his name again and again, but the only response was the low hum of the refrigerator and that awful, awful silence. They said it was a heart attack, sudden, fatal. One of those things you can't see coming, even if it's been building for years. The house filled quickly after that. Family, neighbors, a blur of condolences and casseroles. People talked about how tragic it was, how young he'd been, how unfair life could be. I nodded, smiled, said thank you, played the part, but inside, it felt like something had snapped, not because I had lost him, but because I had never gotten the chance to tell him the truth or ask him if he already knew it. And then there was Desmond, always close, always helpful. He handled the paperwork, the legal mess, the funeral home calls. He knew how to move through grief without letting it drown him. He held space for me, but I couldn't tell if it was out of loyalty or guilt. Some nights, I'd wake up and forget Michael was gone. I'd reach across the bed and feel the cold sheet where his warmth used to be. And in those moments, I didn't cry. I listened, because sometimes I swore I could still hear his voice, like it was caught between the walls, waiting. The night before the funeral, the house was too quiet, too still, like the air itself was holding its breath. I hadn't slept. I couldn't. The bedroom felt too big, too cold, the silence louder than grief. So I wandered. I found myself in the living room barefoot, holding a glass of wine I didn't remember pouring. The clock ticked louder than usual. Every shadow in the room seemed to whisper something I wasn't ready to hear. Then came the knock. 3 short taps, not frantic. Just certain I didn't have to ask who it was. Desmond stood at the door, sleeves rolled up, eyes unreadable. He looked tired, not just physically, but soul deep. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie stuffed into his pocket. His presence was quieter than usual, but heavier. "I was just checking on you," he said. His voice was low, careful, like he was afraid of disturbing something fragile between us. I nodded, didn't invite him in, but I didn't step back either. "I can't sleep," I said. "Me neither." We stood there for a moment, not speaking, but everything that had gone unsaid between us filled the space. He didn't reach for me. He didn't have to. He stepped inside, and the door closed with a quiet click behind him, the kind of sound that feels final. We sat on the couch, a respectable distance apart, but it felt like the room had shrunk. I keep thinking, did he know I asked? Desmond didn't look at me, just nodded slightly. I think he felt it. I swallowed. Maybe I wanted him to. His eyes met mine at that. Something passed between us. Not new, just finally acknowledged. "I'm not proud of it," I said, but I wasn't blind. "I saw how you looked at me, and you knew I looked back." He didn't argue, didn't flinch. Instead, he reached out and took the glass from my hand, setting it gently on the coffee table. His fingers lingered just long enough for it to matter. And then slowly, not impulsively, but with intention, he reached for me. He pulled me into him, arms folding around me, like a man claiming something he had waited too long to touch. It wasn't a polite hug. It wasn't about comfort. It was confession. My cheek landed against his chest. I could hear his heartbeat, fast, erratic, too loud for mourning. His hand slid low along my back. Not obscene, but bold. I didn't stop him. He bent slightly, his lips brushing the top of my head, then grazing the shell of my ear. I shivered. "This is wrong," I whispered. "I know," he said. But he didn't move. His fingers trailed down my spine, light as breath. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. He held me tighter, his chest against mine, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice low, rough, and real. But I didn't say a word. I tilted my face just enough. His breath met mine, and we hovered there, not kissing, but closer than we had any right to be. It wasn't passion, it was pressure. Years of it, finally cracking, and just as his hand began to rise again, bang, bang, bang. The knock at the front door shattered everything. We jumped apart like guilty children. Desmond stood up, dragging a hand over his face, his breathing uneven. I should go. I nodded. He reached the door, paused. "Clara." I didn't turn. I couldn't. He left. And when the door clicked shut behind him, the silence that returned wasn't empty. It was charged. And it would not let me rest. The day of the funeral was heavy, not just with grief, but with the kind of silence that feels loaded, like every glance could be an accusation. I wore black. Of course, a modest dress, pearls the kind Michael always said, made me look proper. I pinned my hair up. I didn't want it brushing my skin. I already felt too exposed. The church was packed. Friends, colleagues, distant family members who barely knew Michael, crying as if they had. Everyone brought flowers. No one brought answers. Desmond stood near the front, stone still. He hadn't said much since that night, not in words, but his silence said everything. When the service ended, people gathered near the casket. I shook hands. I nodded. I received condolences with the same expression I'd worn since the moment I found Michael's body, polite sorrow, balanced on the edge of something deeper. Then I saw her, Mrs. Della Mayfield, sitting alone in the back pew, hands folded neatly over her purse, watching, not grieving, not praying. Watching our eyes met. She didn't smile, didn't nod. She just looked. And in that moment, I felt like she knew everything. Not from gossip, not from evidence, from observation. She didn't need proof. She had seen the way I stepped aside, the way Desmond stood too close, the way guilt looks when it tries to behave. I turned away quickly, my stomach tightening. But before I could escape to the car, another set of eyes stopped me cold. Caleb, Michael's younger brother. He stood by the exit arms, crossed, his expression unreadable, not grief-stricken, not angry, just still. But there was something in his stare, something that made my skin crawl. He said nothing. He didn't have to. In that second, I remembered something Michael once said long ago when we first started dating. Caleb doesn't talk much, but he remembers everything. And now, here he was, silent, still and watching. The house felt different after the funeral. Emptier, heavier grief, I'd expected, but not this. Quiet knowing. It settled in the floorboards, the walls, the drawers I'd left untouched. Especially that one in his study. Michael had always kept that drawer locked. Not secretive, just private. The key was taped under the desk. I'd found it once years ago. Never used it until now. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe something to prove that he forgave me, or that he didn't. The drawer creaked open like it resented being disturbed. Inside, bank statements, a copy of his will, some handwritten notes, and an envelope. My name on it. Clara, no darling, no love. Just my name in his handwriting. Clean, precise, measured. My hands trembled as I opened it. If you're reading this, I'm probably gone. I've known for a while. Not everything, but enough, I suppose. I hoped it wasn't true, that it was just my imagination, that maybe Desmond looked at you too long because he didn't know where else to look, that maybe you looked back out of politeness. But I'm not a fool, Clara. I never have been. I wasn't sure whether to confront you or just let it die quietly, like so many things between us already have. But if you're holding this letter, I guess I never got the chance. There are things I was planning to do, things I wanted to change. I met with a lawyer, not Desmond. You'll find the documents if you dig a little deeper. I wanted to leave with dignity, not bitterness. I loved you. Even when I wasn't sure I liked you anymore, I didn't realize I was crying until I tasted the salt. He'd known. For how long? Weeks, months. And he'd never said a word. He'd chosen silence over confrontation, distance over drama. But still, he'd been planning to leave. And Desmond, had he known that? Or worse, had he helped make sure Michael never got the chance? It was the night after the funeral. The house was darker than usual, or maybe I was just seeing it differently now. Everything had edges. Shadows stretched longer. Silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was alert. I was in the kitchen, When the knock came, not a soft one, not like Desmond's. 3 firm pounds, direct. I hesitated, then opened the door. Caleb, he didn't look like he'd come to grieve. He looked like someone with a mission. He stepped inside without waiting for me to invite him. Same calm demeanor, same quiet intensity. The kind Michael had warned me about once, back when Caleb barely said a word. "I know," he said. The words hit like cold water. I blinked. Know what? He looked around the room, then back at me. That you and Desmond, that something was going on. I froze. "You don't know what you're talking about." He gave a small, bitter laugh. "Come on. You really think Michael didn't notice? He wasn't blind." I swallowed hard. He told me. Caleb continued. "Weeks ago, said he thought something had changed, that you were distant, that Desmond looked at you like a man who'd already made a decision." My hands clenched around the edge of the counter. He wanted proof. He was going to talk to you. Then Caleb stopped, looked at me sharply. Then he was dead. "Michael had a heart attack," I said too quickly. "Did he?" Caleb's tone was like a knife wrapped in velvet, or did someone just make it look that way? The room shrank around me. I felt it in my spine, that electric chill. "You think I think it's convenient," he said, cutting me off. "Too convenient. Michael finds something, tells me, makes plans. And then he drops dead in his own kitchen." He stepped closer. "Let me ask you something, Clara. Who was the last person to see him alive? I couldn't breathe. I was. And who arrived just minutes after he collapsed? Desmond." Caleb nodded slowly, like a puzzle piece had just clicked into place, one he didn't like the shape of, but couldn't ignore. "I'm not accusing," he said, "yet. But if I were you, I'd be careful." He turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. "I'll be watching. Not because I want to prove something." He looked over his shoulder, "but because I think Michael already did." Then he was gone, and I stood alone, surrounded by shadows that suddenly felt like eyes. Desmond came just after sunset. I hadn't called him, but he came anyway. The moment I heard his car crunch over the gravel, something inside me clenched. Not from guilt this time, from fear. He stepped out like nothing had changed, but everything had. I opened the door before he knocked. His face was tight, guarded. I couldn't tell if he was here for answers or to keep me quiet. "You talked to Caleb, didn't you?" I said, before he even stepped in. Desmond's jaw worked. "What did he say to you?" "That he knew," I said. "That Michael told him everything. That he was going to confront me. That he was making plans." I stepped aside to let him in, but part of me wanted to close the door behind him and lock it from the inside. We sat on opposite ends of the couch this time. No closeness, no touches, only questions. "You didn't tell me." "He called you the night he died," I said. He looked at the floor. "I didn't think it mattered." "It matters now," I snapped. "Caleb thinks we had something to do with it, and I don't even know if he's wrong." Desmond looked up sharply. "You think I don't know what to think," I cried. "Everything is twisted. You show up minutes after he collapses. You say you froze. But you're not someone who freezes Desmond. You're someone who calculates." His face darkened. "So what, Clara? You think I killed him? That I watched him fall and just let him die? Tell me you didn't." "I didn't," he shouted. Then softer. "I swear to you, Clara, I didn't." I stared at him searching, but I didn't find what I was looking for. What I saw was a man sweating through his shirt, breathing too fast, trying too hard to sound calm. My voice broke. I'm scared. So am I, he said. We sat in that fear together, the kind that doesn't shout, but settles between your ribs and whispers, "This will never be over." Then he said quieter, "If you don't trust me, maybe I should leave." And for a second, I wanted to say yes, but I didn't. Because if Desmond left, I wasn't sure I'd ever feel safe again. The house is quieter now, not peaceful, just still. Every sound seems louder, every silence heavier, and I can't tell if that's grief or guilt. Desmond hasn't come back. Not yet. Part of me keeps listening for the sound of his car. Part of me prays it never comes. I sit at the kitchen table, the same spot where Michael made his last cup of coffee. The letter still sits beside me, unread a second time, because once was enough. I keep turning over his words in my mind. I loved you, even when I wasn't sure I liked you anymore. It's the kind of line that splits you open, because it's not anger. It's resignation. It's a man who knew and walked away quietly. I think that's what hurts the most. Not the betrayal, but the silence. And now that silence is mine, there's something about losing someone and not knowing how they really left you. It haunts. Not just in the ghost story sense, though. Sometimes I swear I hear footsteps when I'm alone. But in the way your memory starts rewriting itself, filling in the blanks with fear. I don't know what Desmond did. I don't know what he didn't do. And maybe I never will. But I do know this. The last time I looked at him, I didn't see the man I once wanted. I saw the man I might need to run from. I used to think that the scariest thing was being left alone. Now I know it's not knowing who you were ever really with. If you've ever been in love with someone you couldn't trust, or trusted someone you shouldn't have loved, tell me, because this story isn't about the end of a marriage. It's about the moment you realize you might have been the only honest person in the room, or the biggest liar. Leave a comment and let me know. Would you have stayed quiet, or would you have run? And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories like this, because truth doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers your name